Hey everyone. Last topic for us to consider is called factor markets. We've considered firms, and this is actually a decent review of the theory of the firm. And uh, we looked at the goods market only so far. We've looked at what happens when a firm competes or is in a perfectly competitive market. They become price takers, profits get ground down to zero. Or we've looked at firms that are monopolies, where they make the price. They can decide what that price level is. They hold back production so they can increase the price. We've also seen variations on that, specifically monopolistic competition, which occurs when a firm doesn't have complete market power, but a lot of market power, and they can still make their own price. There are two additional pieces. So a firm, we talk about their output, but what about their inputs? Inputs are called the factors of production, and we look at the factor market. The good news is, even though there's a ton of things that go into the production and inputs of any product, at this level we can get the same concepts across if we only consider labor as the factor of production. So sure, like we could talk about coffee beans and the market that coffee beans come out of. Are they a monopoly or are they competitive? But it's easier to just talk about, well, just labor. And again, you could substitute like any variable input any variable thing, something that would be considered a variable cost, in as the other factor. But we're just going to look at labor. The price of labor is called the wage. It's the wage that you get paid. Okay, so the factor market, the wage market, it could be competitive. Imagine, I'm going to give you two scenarios. One is in Silicon Valley, where you have like Facebook, Google, Amazon, a ton of other tech things. If you're like a competitive, like a really high level coder, you're going to compete in a labor market that is competitive in the sense that firms can firms can bid and you can bid as a potential worker, and it would be just like a supply and demand market that has some equilibrium quantity and some equilibrium wage that people would pay, and essentially it becomes one wage is what comes out. There's one set wage. Why is that? Because if you knew that Facebook offered $500,000 as a starting salary, you wouldn't go to Google if they were offering $400,000 as a salary. And similarly, if whatever the going wage is, like if it's $75,000 starting salary, that's where everybody is. If there's profits to be made from that, firms would enter that labor market. All that stuff that we've talked about with how markets work. But if it was competitive, it's that same idea. Is firms get one wage. So what happens then if a firm is hiring workers from a competitive market? They can then be in a situation where they sell their goods to a competitive market, or be in a situation where they sell their goods in a monopoly. And remember, with monopoly, if you want to sell more things, you need to lower the price, but you need to lower the price for all the things. That's what we're going to look at in this, this video. If a firm is the only game in town, imagine like a long dirt road in the Midwest, and there's no firms except there's one big Target in the middle of everywhere, and it's a super Target that sells groceries and shrubs. Like, it's not like a Home Depot place, but also sells like regular things or whatnot. That's the only place that people can work. Well, that Target would be able to say, well, the wage is $8.50 to work here. And someone couldn't go say, well, I'm going to go work at Walmart. I'm going to go work at Home Depot. There's no other place for them to work. So they get to set the wage. But that firm could also be producing and selling things in a competitive market. Why? Well, Amazon exists. People in that small town might not be able to work for that Target, but they might be able to buy the same goods from Amazon. So their outputs might be in a competitive market, even though their inputs are from one market. So the best example to start with is, well, what does a firm consider, or when does a firm consider adding more workers? That concept is called the marginal revenue product. We looked at marginal physical product when we looked at the theory of the firm, and we also sneakily looked at marginal revenue product, although we didn't explicitly call it that. So all that marginal revenue product is the contribution to the firm's revenue for using one more unit of a factor. Okay, well, we're talking about labor. So really what this means is how much more revenue does the firm bring in for hiring one more person? Marginal revenue product equals the change in total revenue for the change in workers, adding one more worker. If the firm is competing or is selling their product in a perfectly competitive market and there's one price, then the marginal revenue product is the marginal physical product, how much each worker contributes, times the price. Just to remind you about marginal physical product, think about like a coffee shop. You have Starbucks baristas, and like the first one or two or three are able to produce a lot of coffee. Adding one more worker adds a good amount more coffee. But when you're hiring like the sixth or seventh barista, there's nothing for them to do, right? Like what do they do? Filling up like the sugar things? Like that's not adding to the production. So even though coffee goes for $5 a pop, adding the sixth worker, it's not that they're a bad worker, there's just nothing for them to do. That's the idea of diminishing marginal returns. Written in more economic language, marginal physical product is the change in capital for change in the factor, or in this case, the change in labor, or adding one more worker. And you can see that it's the same thing, change in total revenue for a change in labor or a change in worker. And again, that's that factor only being workers. All right, what does this look like? Here's a chart that we've actually looked at before, and I want you to focus on the left-hand side. So I'm going to give you this handout, but this is a firm selling in a perfectly competitive market. Trying to get the whole graph in here. Okay. So I want you to focus on the first two. This is straight out of like just basic theory of the firm. Increase workers, increase the output, and then what's the marginal product or the change in output? 8. Then the second worker adds 7, third worker adds 6, fourth worker adds 5, fifth worker adds 4. This is the diminishing marginal returns. Then the price is just the price of a product. I don't know what this product is we're talking about. Maybe this is coffee, and a cup of coffee is $3. And so the first worker adds 8 units of coffee. The coffee sells for $3 a piece. The revenue that first worker brings in is $24. Then when you add a second worker, the total production is 15. Their marginal physical product is 7, because 15 minus 8 is 7 more. Times 3 is the price, and that gets you the 21 marginal resource production, marginal revenue product. And then the total revenue, just to remember, is price times quantity is 15 times 3. Third worker gets hired. Production goes from 15 to 21. That's a marginal production of 6. This is a firm that's selling its good in a perfectly competitive market, so the price is still $3. 21 times 3 is $63 of total revenue. Marginal physical product, well, that worker helped make 6 cups of coffee or whatever this output is, times 3 is 18. But marginal revenue product is also the change in revenue for adding one more worker. And that continues throughout. Price times quantity, 3 times 26 gives you the total revenue. Marginal revenue product is the difference here, 78 minus 63. But also, it's 15 times 3. That worker makes 5 things. They sell for $3 a piece. Get you $15 of marginal revenue product. An easy way to think of marginal revenue product, how much money does the worker bring in? Okay, so what should a firm hire? A firm should hire labor up to the point when the marginal revenue product, how much money the company brings in, is equal to the wage. So if a worker brings in $12, you shouldn't pay them $13. You should pay them $12 or less. Well, where does that wage come from? We're saying that this is a competitive labor market. A competitive labor market has supply and demand. I'm over here on the right on this graph. Here's the demand for workers. That's the demand from firms. Here's the supply of workers. That's people. People are like, well, how many? I'm going to work for a certain wage for like, whatever, $100 an hour. A lot of people would work for like $8 an hour. Not a lot of people would work. That's the way of how the supply of labor comes from. And then that wage gets set. Okay, the going wage is $10. Then we look here. You should certainly hire the first person. You should hire all these people. You should hire the fifth person because the wage is $10. You have to pay them 10, but you're bringing in 2 or 12 for a profit of 2. You should not hire the sixth worker. So in that case, the labor that you should hire is 5 workers. This is decreasing by 3. It doesn't have to decrease by 3, but this is the marginal revenue product graph. It's linear. You could think of it in side-by-side graphs like we did for competitive markets. Here's the market and here's the firm's marginal revenue product. There's the wage comes across, boom, that's the labor. There it is graphically, but I think for the AP exam, you'd only really look at this like with a table. Okay, so something happens. Remember, we spent a bunch of time being like, there's a change in the supply of workers. Maybe there's less workers working for some reason. Maybe there's more demand for workers because more companies have entered. Whatever happens, maybe they're more productive. Whatever happens in the labor market, the wage, external from this firm's data, which is all over here, the wage becomes $15 an hour. You have to pay your workers more. Yep, you should still hire all these workers, but that fifth worker brought $12 in. It was fine to pay them 10, but if you have to pay them 15, you don't hire them. You wouldn't hire them. You would hire the fourth worker, sort of a wash between hiring them and not, but we don't want to deal with, well, we would hire the 3.999th person, so we just say, okay, we'll hire that fourth person, period. We do the exact same analysis if the firm is selling in a monopoly, but the competitive labor market exists. Here's a competitive labor market. The wage is 10 and 15, and I'm not going to talk about where those came from. Same thing, labor. It's the same data. Quantity, boom, goes up. Marginal physical product, marginal production, decreasing marginal returns. That's why that's going down. Right? The 7th barista only adds 2 cups of coffee. But this firm is selling in a monopoly. And what we learned when we talked about a monopoly is in order to sell more quantity, they have to decrease the price. Don't worry about functional form here, but I don't know why I chose these numbers to go down by 10 cents. It's sort of whatever, that's what I did. So here's price and quantity. Actually, that's the demand curve. Not super relevant here, except for the fact that if the firm wants to sell 21 things, they need to have a price of $2.70. If they want to sell more, what do they need to do? They need to lower the price. They lower the price by 10 cents. People buy 5 more. So that price is going down. So a worker comes in. You have 2 things sort of working here. The quantity goes down. Sorry, the marginal quantity or the marginal physical product goes down. So they're not producing as much as, say, the 5th or 4th. And the price has to go down in order to sell those 2 more goods. And that price has to go down for all the other goods. What that does, if you do the same analysis, price times quantity is revenue, and marginal revenue product is the difference here, and this is just like 67.6 minus 56.7 is 10.9, right? And so forth and so on. This is how much more revenue a worker brings in. The 7th worker produces 2 things. Well, to sell those 2 things, you have to lower the price, and you have to lower the price for everybody. So they only bring in $1.30 more. You can't go paying them $10 if they're an hour if they're only bringing in $1.30 per hour. So that's graphed out would be a new marginal revenue product curve. But the idea is if in the labor market, which is external, because this is a competitive labor market, was $10, you would hire the 4th worker who brings in $10.90, but you would not hire the 5th worker. Remember, these numbers are lower because this firm is a monopoly, so to sell more, they have to lower the price. If the wage, for some reason in the labor market, comes out as $15, what's going on? Well, you wouldn't hire the 3rd worker because the 3rd worker only brings in $14.70. You'd hire the 2nd worker, though, because they bring in $18.80. I went through that pretty quick. You can slow down the video. You can watch the video again. You can look at the practice problems. But the key is a firm will hire someone. This is like common sense, right? If a firm will hire someone, if the amount of money they bring in, that's this column, is greater than the amount of money that it costs to hire them, right? Like that's a decision every person that owns a company makes. Well, should I hire this person? Well, they're going to bring in blank amount of money for me. I can't hire them for less than that. That would be dumb. I'm not going to hire someone for $10 an hour if they're only going to bring in $5 of revenue. I'm losing $5 an hour on that. Where that comes from, how much money they comes in, depends on that marginal revenue product. There's a practice problem to go through these. And again, you can go through this and like slow it down or go back to only certain parts. Thanks. Bye-bye.